A cloudy February morning in Toronto, a fight over tariffs in Washington, and a new push to lock in NATO's Arctic focus, all in the same news cycle. And later in the brief, the one number to remember from Canada's new build-at-home defense plan and why it could change how gear gets bought and built. Toronto first. It's cloudy today, with temperatures around 2 degrees Celsius, topping out near 5. On the local money and movement front, the latest Buy Canadian mood is running into a reality check at the very top of the system. Canada's biggest pension funds remain heavily invested in the United States. The Canada Pension Plan is now at a record $780.7 billion in assets, and about 47% of its portfolio sits in the U.S., compared to 13% in Canada. CPP says it's sticking to a long-term investing approach and won't swing with short-term politics, even as some consumers do. One small human-scale snapshot of that, an Ontario dad has been posting Canadian-made product finds every day for 135 straight days, trying to make it easier to choose domestic brands. But he says it's added real time to basic shopping, because Canadian-made is often hard to spot quickly. Sports check-in. A quieter day on the Toronto Pro calendar in this brief, but here's what I'll be watching next. How the Leafs and Raptors' next games are framed. Are we seeing lineup tinkering and development minutes, or a push for short-term wins? That tone usually tells you what the team thinks it is right now. Turning now to the higher stakes thread that runs through a lot of today's national news. Canada is trying to make the Arctic a permanent, organized priority inside NATO, while also trying to make more of its defense equipment and supply chain domestic. Here's what's happening. NATO has launched a coordination effort called Arctic Sentry, meant to line up allied military activity in the Arctic and the high north, exercises, presence, logistics, and the basic choreography of who's doing what and when. Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand is urging NATO to make that initiative permanent, arguing the high north can't be treated as a secondary theater anymore. Alongside that, Canada and Denmark, including Greenland and the Faroe Islands, signed a memorandum of understanding on defense cooperation at the Munich Security Conference. It covers innovation, industrial cooperation, logistics support, training, and joint exercises. A key point, this isn't a treaty, and it doesn't add new defense obligations beyond what already exists under NATO's Article 5. Think of it as a practical framework, a way to make it easier to work together, move people and equipment, and build compatible plans. Why now? Partly because the Arctic is getting busier, strategically and commercially, and partly because politics around Greenland have sharpened. Canada has opened a consulate in Nuuk, and Canadian actions are being framed as solidarity with Denmark after U.S. annexation threats toward Greenland. Canada also shares about a 3,000-kilometer maritime border with Denmark. And there are long-standing cultural ties between Inuit communities in Canada and Greenland. Why this matters locally, even if you don't live in the north. Big Arctic security decisions tend to pull on southern supply chains, ports, shipyards, aerospace maintenance, and manufacturing, and those tend to show up in jobs, procurement, and timelines across the country. And that connects directly to the other major piece today, Canada's build-at-home defense industrial strategy, backed by $6.6 billion. The headline goal is to award 70% of federal defense contracts to Canadian firms within a decade, reducing reliance on foreign suppliers and improving readiness, with targets to raise the serviceability of equipment across the Navy, Army, and Air Force. The government says it also wants to increase defense exports by 50% and build toward about 125,000 jobs by 2035. The risk here is execution. Big procurement shifts can collide with capacity constraints, how fast domestic industry can scale, whether parts and components can be sourced, and whether the military can keep equipment available while transitions happen. Some critics are also asking a basic question: where, specifically, does the money come from over time? Cuts, borrowing, or new revenues? One mid-brief tieback. This is also happening while Buy Canadian sentiment grows in daily life. But pensions, procurement, and national security are the places where the biggest dollars move and where change is slowest. Two quick international and trade signals that reinforce the same theme: Canada trying to reduce vulnerability while keeping the U.S. relationship workable. First, in Washington, The U.S. House voted 219-211 for a resolution to end the national emergency President Trump used to justify 35% tariffs on many Canadian imports that don't qualify for CUSMA exemptions. 6 Republicans joined Democrats. This doesn't end the tariffs on its own. The Senate would have to approve it, and the president can veto, but it's a symbolic crack in the political support for the approach. Second, on a key cross-border choke point, U.S. House Democrats are launching a probe after President Trump threatened to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Canadian officials say Canada paid roughly $4 billion to build it, and that it's publicly owned under the Canada-Michigan Crossing Agreement, with oversight shared by an international authority representing both Canada and Michigan. The concern from the U.S. side is that political interference could disrupt trade flows and manufacturing schedules. Final minute, what to watch next, and what's still uncertain. On the Arctic file, watch whether NATO members treat Arctic Sentry as a pilot project or as a standing part of alliance planning with staffing, regular reporting, and predictable exercises. Permanence is the prize Canada is pushing for, and it would be a signal that the Arctic has moved up a tier inside NATO. On the build-at-home plan, the number to hold on to is 70%, the share of contracts targeted for Canadian firms within a decade. The next practical question is how Ottawa defines Canadian content, how it handles exceptions, and whether the readiness targets, more usable ships, vehicles, and aircraft, actually move in the next couple of years, not just on paper. And on tariffs, the House vote is a political message, not a policy change yet. The timeline to watch is the Senate's next move, and whether a veto threat becomes a veto reality. That's the brief for Tuesday, February 17th.